screen.
They're not in charge of their outcomes in the same way.
Share the big one. And just real quick, we got audio, turn the video on. All right. Are you ready to go? All right, guys. So this is 10 o'clock session. Like any class, we're gonna make sure you're in the right spot. So if you are not here to see Miss Heather Montgomery for this session, you gotta do a little awkward stand up, slink out of the classroom, and nobody will say anything. But if you are here for this one, she will introduce herself and we'll let you know 10 minutes to go.
Thanks. Hey, y'all. I'm Heather L. Montgomery. I write for kids. Heather L. Montgomery, because there's a Heather Montgomery who writes about prostitution. That is not me. So, I know a few of you from last session, but if not, just you guys feel free to stop me there. But I got a ton of material I want to go through today. So I'm gonna go fast. So if you need to stop me, let me know. Now, my entire PowerPoint is a PDF on my website. So heatherlmontgomery.com, scroll to the bottom and you can get that PDF. It'll be there for like a week or so. That way you'll have some of the resources that you may or may not want. So y'all are interested in writing for kids. You may already write for kids. Something about this industry appealed to you. I'm just gonna talk about the journey, right? And it is that. It's a big journey. It's a lot about the business end that I didn't have any clue. But they're little people, but there's such big possibilities, right? If we can inspire those little people, man, we can change the world, which every day, that's the thing I have to remember. This is not working. Let's see. Okay. So, there, now it's working. So I'm gonna say the first suggestion is to prepare for the long haul. This is not a short journey. I was really fortunate in that I got published relatively quickly. For a lot of folks, it's about a 10-year before you get to 5 or 10 years before you get to your first publication, which can be very overwhelming, but it's worth it. I'll tell you, this is where I started in 2005. I got interested in writing books for kids. I had no interest in being a writer. I'm a nature teacher. I take kids outdoors and we learn about nature. And one day I realized, hey, I can reach a whole heck of a lot of kids through writing. Not something I ever wanted to do, but I got really lucky in that I went to this organization called SCBWI. I'll come back to that because it's going to be an important one. That organization had a conference in Birmingham and I picked up a brochure and there was a nature writers retreat at Highlights Foundation. You know Highlights magazine. Well, those people are great people and they have a foundation just for kid lit writers. Kid lit defines anywhere from 0 to 21. Okay, so that includes YA, depending on who you ask. But anyway, I went to that event, fantastic. And most importantly, I met the science editor there at Highlights and we talked. And he said, Heather, don't send me articles. Well, he said, I want those little 3-sentence blurbs that we have. I need them desperately and nobody sends them. So I went and did my research and I sent a whole bunch. Got a credit in Highlights and that was fantastic because guess what? They are well respected in the industry. All right, people think, it's just a magazine. No, that is the magazine to be in because they're very selective and they treat their writers well, which is really nice. So that was in 2006. I got that like first sold to him. Didn't publish until 2009, but still by 2006, I could write that in my cover letter. It was awesome. I was like, oh, this magazine thing, this is a thing, which is awesome because, you know, I always thought about books, but I never thought about magazines. But magazines come out quicker and they reach more kids, which is awesome. So I actually started writing on assignment for High 5, which is their really little one, which I'm not really good at. So I learned that quickly. But these are science magazines and some of them are classroom and that's my background. So I was like, ooh, I could do this. Lean into what you do well. And so I did. And then at another SCBWI conference, I met a guy who he was called a book packager. He was like the middleman between the editors and writers, and he helped people get assignments in what we call the educational industry. Yeah, okay. So I started writing for them, educational publishers, and I wrote on topics I would not be interested in, but you know, I learned a lot. And then as I worked for those educational publishers, I got closer and closer to my subject that I really like to write. And I'm showing you nonfiction because that's my jam, but there's fiction available in these as well. And so this is really cool because I'm building credit. I wrote 10 books for the educational industry and really on a faster scale. And then at one of these conferences, I met a teacher. And I was not at all nervous because she wrote easy readers, the like first reader books, fiction. Never gonna write for her. So I didn't have to be nervous. We had a great conversation. It was awesome. A hint is always volunteer because you volunteer to get to meet people. Well, I was supposed to be her angel and shepherd her from session to session to session. Well, a month later, she emails me and says, Heather, I moved to Scholastic and guess what? They want nonfiction. And I don't know any nonfiction writers, so send me something fast. I was like, yes, thank you. So credit at Scholastic, pretty good. So I wrote 2 books with them. And these are kind of my jam, but still I was writing them very specifically. What is an assignment? But it kind of was an assignment. She says, I need a book fair book about the can't be normal animals. I'm like, okay, I'm on that. So it was kind of something not. And then that's my babies. These are my weird, wacky self. Like I wrote a book about bugs that have mommies and daddies, literally, because some insects do take care of their kids, which is weird. I literally wrote a book about roadkill for kids, which who would ever do that? I shouldn't have done it, but now I did it, and it's like the best thing I ever did. So weird. Little Monsters in the Ocean is about every kid learns about metamorphosis, and they get beat over the head with frogs and butterflies, right? Which are awesome creatures, but you know what? All these other things in the ocean go through metamorphosis. I'm like, well, let's teach them about them. And they're weird and they're wacky, and kids love weird, wacky stuff. So the thing that happened is when I started writing these books, which are in the trade industry, then I started getting kids because of that. I started getting awards and recognition on those books. So what happened is I grew myself right through these other things. I thought I was just doing this what I could, but I grew my writing skill and confidence and ability, and the network too, because that's something. Then I wrote a book about poop because animal poop, right? And they have all these animal poop books for little kids, but kids don't outgrow that just because they're 6th graders. What's in Your Pocket is a book I didn't think would ever sell, but it's my most popular book. It's about kids who bring home things in their pockets, and guess what? They turn into great scientists. Because an editor kept saying, Heather, would you please submit this isn't when picture book biographies weren't like so overrun, a picture book biography of a scientist. History, I don't like history. And then they kept asking, I'm like, okay, let me go. And I went and I looked at a whole bunch of those biographies, like, full-length biographies, and every single one, there was one little page, one little scene that was interesting. There was a time the kid was getting in trouble. But I'm like, no, the reason they're doing that, the reason she did that is because she wanted to learn about those worms. That's why she put them under her pillow. And I saw her science skills developing. And I was like, oh, I need to write about that. And the message there is you gotta pay attention to little teeny things that wiggle in your brain that you think are fascinating and every other weird, right? But that's what's really cool is you follow that curiosity. No matter if it's fiction or nonfiction, whatever it is, you gotta listen to that little piece in your gut and your brain that says, what's that about? And then my most recent book was Sick, which is about animal epidemics. During the epidemic, I wonder what happens to wildlife. And it's really weird because it's also it's got panel art, which I didn't know I could write that way. It's got a lot of graphic novel-ish pieces, because I think of science as like a process, and that's what that kind of art is. Anyway, the point of all this is it took me a long time to get, but the whole time I was kind of growing skills. And it's easy in this long process to get lost and lose hope. But it's a process, it's a growth. Just like the kids we're writing for, we're growing, we're developing as writers. Don't try to do it alone. I know a lot of writers are solitary individuals, and that's well and good, but you're going to need someone to cry on because you're going to get lots and lots of rejections. If you get into this industry, they say when you get your 50th rejection letter, then you're a real writer. I mean, when you can wallpaper your walls with the letters that come back, they don't come back as letters anymore, they're emails. But actually, they don't even come back as emails. They just don't respond to you. That's what happens in the industry nowadays. The reality of it is editors are so busy, they just don't respond, basically. which is really sad. But this is the organization that taught me the business. It's called SCBWI. When they started as a group of like 5 friends that like said, oh, somebody else writes, they had no idea it's become the largest international organization for kid lit writers. SCBWI.org. I'm not a salesperson for them, but I should be because it's where I learned the industry. Not only do you want to join them, but you want to be active. All right. So we have a region that is Georgia, Florida, and the panhandle of Georgia, Alabama, and the panhandle of Florida. And it's great, but we're also really close to Nashville. There's another region that's Nashville and Kentucky, and they have most of their events in Nashville. So we're kind of like on the edge, and you can go to any event if you're a member. So it's a great organization. It's people that understand us. It's people who say, Heather, I had to turn down this assignment. Do you want it? Yeah, I'm like, yeah. So it's the people who help me critique my manuscripts. Read 100 recent books that are like, it is crazy, but unless we do that, we don't know what's being published. We don't know we don't know what people are buying, because they're sure not the books that I read when I was a kid. You know, they're very different. The industry's very different. So it's very helpful to read a lot of recent books. And it helps you kind of figure out what niche you fall into. It helps you understand the niches that are available. And what I do is I don't only read them, but I record the publisher, because understanding the publisher is really an important piece of this industry. Because you can write the most amazing thing ever, but if it's not what they want, it's kind of like an editor once told me. She said, Heather, it's like I'm walking to the mall. This is back when you used to walk into the mall and look for a dress. And she says, and I need a dress for a cocktail party, but yet you're pitching me jeans. I can't do that. It's not even what she wants. She needs a cocktail dress, right? Like her publisher says, okay, Katie, I need, science fiction for a 5th grader. They can't buy anything else. That's just what it is. No matter how quality the writing is. And find or start, there wasn't a critique group that matched what I needed, so I had to start my own critique group to study. I like getting feedback, so I have one in person, well, not functioning right now, but I have several online because I need a lot of different things. That's just who I am. Any questions so far? I know I'm kind of, okay. Train hard. So I believe that studying the industry really helped me get where I am. Some folks don't work this way. They're just going to write what they want, which is fine. But I like to work smart, and I like to understand what's needed out there. It doesn't mean I'm writing to the trends, but if I'm not informed about what kind of stuff they're ever going to buy, I could spend a lot of time writing stuff that will never be published. Now, some of my stuff, like this book, How Rude, it was ahead of its time. So I submitted it once to that same editor who bought the other Scholastic book that I don't have up here, and it was rejected by multiple editors. 2 years later, same manuscript, I didn't change a word. Several publishing houses fighting for it. I didn't do anything different, but Common Core had come into play, and so all of a sudden they were interested in nonfiction that had a voice, nonfiction that was playful, nonfiction that came at things with a unique approach. That's what that book was. But because I was studying the industry, I saw a shift in what was being published, so I resubmitted. And that's how I could get that book published. That book actually was the first one. I want to see a story. This is some of the early manuscripts for that one. Ridiculous how many drafts it went through. I think I'll show you here. Okay. So I got to know the Kid Lit library, and this is important. You want to find a good library for children, and one that has a librarian that really knows what she's talking about, or he is talking about. This lady, I spent so much time when I was studying the industry, the education. This lady knew me so well that when my snake books came out, she actually, you can't tell, but she was wearing her snake vertebrae earrings. Like she was that into it because she knew I'd spent so much time there. So let me tell you a little bit about how I study this. Because like, if you haven't really looked at kids' books, or if you have, you probably go, oh, there's such an array of children's books out there. And they're for different audiences and different voices, and all these different things to get your hands around it. What I did, and these are actually my books, but I did the same basic thing, is I would take 3 books on the same subject, but very different books. And I would study and I would rewrite what they had on that same subject. So for example, the books about snakes and how they shed. All right, this is for, first grader. It was written at a 1.5 grade reading level. This one later was written at a 4th grade reading level. And then this later was, well, I don't have to, it's a trade book, so I don't have to do the reading level in it. But so what I mean is I went in and looked at books and I really analyzed them carefully to understand language and sentence structure, to understand what vocabulary was being used, what topics were considered of interest. These are educational publishers, so it was important for them that certain vocabulary be used. Trade publishers, they don't care, okay? Or sometimes they do care because they don't want you to assign to the client, depending on. But I find that rewriting somebody else's work really helps me a lot. I really can study it well. Understand the publishers is huge. So if you go in my bookshelves at home, they're not organized by topic or by author. They're organized by publisher. And the publishers that I really want to publish with are all on one shelf. And there's a reason for that, because publishers they're all very unique. And I like to write information that teaches kids, but it's also fun. All right, I want to walk that balance. Some people want to write really educational stuff. Some people want to write stuff with a very strong moral message. Some people want to write stuff that's just for fun, whatever. Different publishers are seeking different things, but they don't articulate that for you. You have to kind of backwardsly engineer it. All right, so say, you have a certain kind of story, you got to find the right press shop to put it in, right? And that's what you're doing, is you're trying to understand what those shops are like. So here's, for example, when I was going to go write for Highlights, here's how I went and studied it. So Highlights has one nonfiction article in every magazine. I learned that by going to the library. I didn't write on the library's copy. This is my copy. But I went to yard sales and bought up a whole bunch of old Highlights. But I went and I would study a whole year's worth of their articles. And here I went through, on Microsoft Word, you can get all that little information, that data about it. So I saw in this, there were 307 words, there were 15 paragraphs, the sentences were this long. I mean, this was really nerdy, right? Really nerdy. But it helped me understand that this was standard. You know what I saw? There was not a single exclamation mark in the whole thing. I'm like, oh, I write with exclamation marks. Can you imagine that? The way I talk, I'm like all excited. Yeah, that was something I learned. I learned that they italicize their words, their vocabulary words, whatever, all the different things that I learned. I learned that their reading level was 81, their grade level was 3.9. So honestly, I don't think that these reading levels are really fantastic, but publishers need them. Educational publishers in specifics. When I got my first assignment to write an educational book, literally, they sent me the outline. That's how prescribed it is. They said your reading level needs to be in the Flush Kincaid. It needs to be within this range of point whatever. It's very, very specific. So educational publishers are very regulated, very specific. Trade publishers. Commercial is way over here on the other end. Okay. But all that work that I did to understand that helps me now when I'm not writing for anything similar to that. Right? I can write a sentence and know if that's okay for a 6th grader to understand, right? It's just because I practice so much. So here's an example. Learner is a publisher that's an educational publisher, but they also take submissions. So they can assign things, but they can also take submissions. So Rebecca Johnson writes for them. So I knew that this was something that she proposed to them. And, I just went and I studied it and I looked at I was looking at active verbs. That's what I was looking at that day. And these are the reading stats that I pulled out for it. So if you read 3 books from a publisher at a certain age level and you see their stats are all about the same, you're like, huh, that means something. right there. That's really important to them. I need to make sure my submission to them or, my writing, my cover letter, whatever, shows them that I understand them. So I'm throwing a bunch of industry jargon, and some of you may be really comfortable with it and some of you may not. So I'm just gonna kind of hit on it to kind of clarify. Again, please don't feel shy about questions. So,
How do you find out what grade level something is?
good question. Yeah, so there's a couple ways. The way that I use most frequently is just take a few passages of it and retype it out in Word and maybe do some statistics in my. Do you use Microsoft Word?
I use Google.
Okay, I don't know if Google Docs has this feature, but there are online sites that will do this. So just Google like reading statistic tool or calculator, and you'll be able to upload a passage and it'll crank it out. Now here's the thing, there's a bunch of different reading statistics ones. It doesn't matter which one you use as long as you consistently use the same one, because it's going to teach you kind of what it does. So what I did is I would do a paragraph and I'd upload it to something like that, and it would give me a 4.3. I'm like, okay, what do I have to do to make it a 4.0? What do I have to do to make it a 5? So I fiddle with the words a little and see, is it length of the words? Is it complexity of the sentence? Is it how many sentences per paragraph? Okay, so all of those things mean different things in the calculators of those. So that's probably the best way to do it, is use it online. Does that answer your question? Okay, good question. So traditional publishing is what I do. I have not done any of the self-publishing or the hybrid publishing. I have quite a few friends who do. Honestly, I'm just not enough of a business person to do that. So I haven't gone that route. Okay, within the traditional publishers, there are folks who use work for hire. So they hire me to do a project, okay? And they pay me a pittance to do it. But it gives me credit and experience. So the type of work for hire I typically do is the educational industry. That's not the only kind. There's also what's called IP work or intellectual property. So a publisher that writes, has the Dr. Seuss line right now. One of my friends has done a Dr. Seuss book. And so it's called an intellectual property. It's also work for hire. She's paid a certain amount ahead of time. Well, not ahead of time. Usually you get paid a percentage on contract when you sign the contract and then when the book is published. Now they've broken it into 3. We get less. So we get it on contract, we get it on submission of our agreed upon draft, and then on publishing. Now, if they decide not to publish, guess what? You don't get that other third. That's just what happens.
So in negotiation, do you have an agent or somebody that represents you?
Great question. So for this, an agent's not gonna mess with that. Like, it's just it's so poor. But I do have an agent now for no, but that's fine. No, that's fine. It's a good thing. And thanks. I do have an agent for all my trade publishing. The kidlit industry is interesting, and I work specifically in the nonfiction, specifically in the science nonfiction. So I actually can submit to quite a few publishers without an agent, but I don't do well with the business stuff, so I go ahead and got an agent. For most fiction, you want an agent, and getting an agent, being represented, is a huge step in and of itself, but it's well worth it in most cases. However, there's a lot that goes into that. And the first agent I had wasn't a good fit. And I stayed in that relationship too long. They say having an agent is kind of like a marriage. You really want to make sure it's right, but when it's not right, you need to get out of it. And I did, but it took like a year to get out of it because I'd given her a bunch of stuff that she was submitting. So I had to wait for all that stuff to kind of clear. So, that was like a 2-year lapse, really. It's not easy, but agents are just like any relationship. It's a relationship and you have to figure out what you want. I don't need an editorial agent. I don't need an agent who's going to review my stuff carefully and get back with me and proofread and all that, because I use a lot of critique groups. I need an agent that's a bulldog. That's what I need. And I also need an agent who will listen, because my sector is so small, there aren't that many editors that do this kind of nonfiction science that's kind of fun and else. So I know them pretty well. So I don't need an agent. Many times you need an agent just to find the right editor. I'm not saying my agents can't. But depending on what genre you work in, if you work in something more open, like, something like a young adult fantasy or something, you're gonna want an agent because they're gonna be really, that's their job, is to get out there and know folks. And how did I meet editors and agents? I went to SCBWI conferences and I attend things. You can do it without that. And if you've been to a conference, one of the nice things about those conferences is when the editor is a faculty member, they will be open to attendees to submit for the next, like, they can limit it like a next month or something like that. So that's really helpful. Now, one thing that folks don't often understand is how important that art director role is for kid lit, especially picture books. It's a totally different world. I didn't even talk to my illustrators, which is very surprising to lots of folks. We'll come back to that in a little bit. But the art director and the editor play equal roles in the industry on picture books. So, back here. Okay, so you don't make a lot of money in this industry. So when you need to make money so you can pay for health insurance, these are your friends. There's a lot of other revenue streams. So the best money anywhere in kid lit, in my opinion, is writing test questions for standardized tests. Awful, boring, challenging brain work. I kind of like it. It's like a puzzle, but it pays well. There are other areas like fact checking for books. Recently, I just fact checked the art for a whole series of nature guides for kids. So whatever your area is, the other thing is I do lots of school visits and I love working with kids, and I'm really fortunate to have that background. And that's another revenue stream, because if you want to be in this industry, just reality is you can't afford to unless you do these other things, unless you happen to be J.K. Rowling. But even for a long time, she did, right? Takes an awful lot of time before you get there. All right, this is an important category. And these things don't always have clear cutoff lines. The industry's kind of blurring things, which is really fun, but makes it a little confusing. Board books are awesome. They're those, cardboard books that toddlers typically use. If you're new, don't even go there. Board books are often done in-house, or they're subbed out to somebody with a big name already. Very rare that a person can submit an original board book and it be accepted. So I'm trying to do it right now. Why am I doing it? I don't know. But I have, 18 credits, and my agent said, well, maybe if you really want to try, Heather. Anyway.
Why is that those are?
So those are all about marketing.
Okay.
So who buys those? Moms and grandmas and people who are going to baby showers. And guess what? If you walk in the bookstore and there's a Sandra Boynton book and you're like, oh, look at a Sandra Boynton book now, the kid, let's buy that. It's all, and then it's very standard concepts. Like, I have a great idea, and every parent, interested in them says, yeah, that's fantastic, but I don't think I can sell it, because it's all about the marketing team. They make a lot of the decisions. Now, picture books we're much more familiar with, right? Picture books are your standard and very standard 32 pages. So I'm not saying that there's not longer picture books than that, but if you're writing a picture book and you're interested, 32 pages, because of the way they're printed. Never made sense to me, but I forgot to bring my huge piece of paper, but they're printed on these big pieces of paper that are then cut and folded. And guess what? If you're more than 32 pages, then you're 36 pages, you just wasted a whole huge sheet of paper, a lot of money. And so it's just not happening. Now, there are some others, like some of mine, nonfiction sometimes is longer, but they're in increments of 8, so that works for the page. So if you're interested in writing picture books, they're a very special piece, because literally it's 50% illustration, 50% writing. And you have to write in a way that leaves room for the illustrator. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Question? Okay, chapter books, another weirdo thing. We'll come back to that. Middle grade is what you think of as the kid's first novel. Old Yeller, books like that. Middle grade typically, in my mind, is like third to sixth, seventh grade, depending on the kid. Every publisher is going to define it a little differently. They're going to define it typically in ages, not grades. I think in grades because I taught kids in schools. Middle grade is awesome. It's really a fun age to write for. Interesting though, from middle grade younger, the buyer is the grown-up. And that totally changes things. Grown-up buys them and they have their own priorities, right? When I was writing a fiction middle grade, which never went anywhere, but like I was told it has to be 100 pages, period. It has to be 100 pages because teachers are going to say that book doesn't count unless it's 100 pages. It's true across the board. That's what like the standard used to be. It's changing, but still, that was, I mean, that doesn't make sense for a book. No, the book needs to be however long it needs to be, but that's the industry. Or a young adult, again, it depends on who you talk to, as far as age, but typically, you know, your teens, but your tweens are reading young adult as well. Young adults are pretty broad category. A general rule is kids like to read 1 or 2 years older than them. So they want to read about a kid who's a little older than them because we all did that. We all idolized the person. So typically, if you start looking at your fiction, middle grade and young adult, they're going to be written at a certain age. And so that all the younger kids will look up to them, right? It's interesting. And so the main character, maybe in middle grade, may actually, some of the things that they're doing might be more appropriate for a kid 2 years younger than them. Might be more normal for a kid 2 years younger than them. But that's because as adults, we don't want kids doing things that they shouldn't do. So it's an interesting way of looking at things. Now, chapter books are a weirdo category because different people use that term differently. But in the industry, what it is a very specific thing. It's another thing I'd never suggest you start with. A chapter book is the book that's the bridge between picture books, easy readers, which we're not even going to go into because their own category, and middle grade. Kids say they're reading a chapter, they mean any book with chapters. But in the industry, chapter books are almost always series. They're almost always character driven. They're almost always a very short chapter. They're like Ramona Quigley, those books. They're like the Magic Tree House. You can't get in. You can't break in that industry. It's very market driven. And the marketing team has a very specific idea of what will work. Because to do a chapter book, they got to commit to a whole huge series and that's a big expense. So they're very hesitant to do that. Because it's true that once kids start reading this kind of book, they want to read the same characters over and over because it's familiar and it's safe. And so that's really driven by that need. So that's kind of the breakdown of those categories. Manuscript is the work you're writing on, the actual text you're working on. Little work in progress. Your submission is when you actually put it to an agent or an editor. Positions is the big thing. So you submit something to your agent, you go back and forth and back and forth, back and forth. Finally, you just decide it's really ready. So the agent's going to submit it to the editor. The editor, if they're interested in it, they're going to do a whole bunch of like financial to figure out if they can afford to have it. And then they're going to take it to an acquisition meeting. And that means it's a bunch of people at the publishing house, mostly the marketing and the money people. And the team is then going to say, oh, do we think we can sell this book? And so the acquisitions meetings, then maybe you get a yes or a no or a maybe. The thing is, it's very easy to get a no. You get a quick no. You get a slow yes. So if you're submitting and it's been forever, you gotta hang on to that. It takes a very long time for them to say yes, because this has to go for a long time, and this has to go for a long time, this has to go for a long time, until you finally get to a contract stage. Tell myself, be patient. I'm waiting on it since December. They've been at an acquisition since December. I'm like, wait, you really want this or not? But it takes a long time. Royalty is your money. But the way that works is typically you get an advance and your agent will negotiate for that. Basically, your advance is paid to say, I'm just going to take a number, say it's $5,000 in advance. Okay, so your advance is probably going to come, like I said, in 3 increments. So smaller and smaller. So you get it, say you get an advance of $5,000 and then the book goes on sale. Say you're getting 3%. Okay. You're not going to see any of that royalty money until you've made up that $5,000. So your advance is literally like they've lent you that money. They can't take it back. They paid it to you. But if you don't submit your manuscript, they can take it back. But your advance is just that. It's an advance. So you literally can have a book out there for a year or 2 or 3 and not see any more money. And most first books never earn out. We call that earning out. An important thing to think about if you're submitting, and it's so hard because we want to submit our stuff soon, is your first book has to do decently. Do decently, because if not, they're not going to second because they've lost money on you basically. Typically, and this number I was told like back in 2015, so it's way wrong, but they said a typical picture book costs the publisher about $50,000. So probably now it's like $100,000. That's a lot of money to sink into a project. You have to understand. There's a reason they take a long time to decide if they can do this book. All right. All right, we're gonna talk about picture books. Anybody here working on picture books? Nobody's.
I want to do
I
one.
do.
Okay, good.
I tried once.
Yeah, they're hard. They're really a challenge. And they literally are a separate art form where you have to think. And maybe you're an author illustrator, then you can think both ways. But as an author by myself, I have to think, I have to let that illustrator play. I have to let them have the room to play. So, the way I do a picture book is I think a lot about how limited my space is. So, like I said earlier, it's 32 pages. You need 13 or more good illustrations. One time I was working on a book and I didn't think about illustrations, and my editor said, "That's a fantastic story, but it couldn't ever be a picture book because the illustration would be boring. You're showing the same thing over and over." It's 50-50 author illustrator. And that sometimes that's money, but I mean actually creative genius. It has to be 50-50. You have to leave room for both. We like to write in rhyme sometimes, and kids like to read in rhyme, but editors hate rhyme. They don't really hate it, but they always say don't submit it. The reason why, it's really hard to do it well. There's so much rhyme that's not strong. It's kind of lazy rhyme. It's the same rhyming words we've heard over and over. Or a lot of times we let the rhyme control our story. And the story is the thing. The story is the core. Like the rhyme should be a bonus, right? If there's good rhyme, it should be a bonus. So if you're a poet and if you're really strong with rhyme, okay, but I really recommend try writing. If you have something in rhyme that's not working, write it without rhyme, which is a challenge in and of itself. But it's really important. Now, the way I make myself think in these 32 pages, which is hard, is I take a big old whiteboard and I block off, these don't count. The first page is the title, the second page is the copyright, and then you start on page 3. So I work in Post-it notes because they make me write tight. And I just block out, this is a spread, 2 pages. These are the spreads. All right. And then I have author's note and learn more because I was writing nonfiction. I got more information here. So that's all the room I have to write it. And that helps me think. And I don't even let myself put real words there. I just put a gist of it, like an outline. That helps me a lot. I also now do it on PowerPoint a lot. So you can have it digitally. I used to do this. I like to move things around. So I did it this way and then take a picture of it. These are just some examples of work for hire stuff I did, if you're interested in that area. Just different types of work for hire, just different categories. And this is the intellectual property type work. And then the trade, oh wait, I wrote a museum too. That's a different thing. All right, so advantages of work for hire is you get money faster. It's shorter timeline. Someone else makes the decisions, believe it or not. It's hard to always have to make your decisions. yourself. The publisher holds all rights. Yeah, thank you. They give you flat fees, they're variable, and they're also very low. For trade, of course, it's your own original idea. You have more control over the rights, all right? Don't forget, all this is on that PDF. There are greater sales opportunities, all right? These things that are in work for hire typically have a library binding on them, and it's way expensive to buy. It's a heavy duty binding. They're never gonna be in a bookstore. If you go to an event like this, they're too expensive for people to wanna buy. Literally, my Little Monsters of the Ocean in hardback is $30. Like, wow. They did finally put it in paperback. The royalties are variable, and they come with your experience level. Oh, here's an example. So this book I was telling you about, How Rude, it started, my very first project. I wrote it in rhyme. It was awful. It was horrible. 2006, I took it to their very first SCBWI conference. You can pay and get a critique from an industry professional. I was so excited. I was going to get an editor. She was going to love it. She was going to take it to Europe and publish it right away. And they didn't give me an editor for my critiquer. They gave me some lowly other author. I would have been so embarrassed had I known then what I know now. The other author was really gracious and let me know that it didn't have to be in rhyme because you couldn't understand it because I'd forced the rhyme so hard. It just didn't make sense. So I tried it again. I was going to do, okay, we're going to write it as a fiction story about this kid named Messy Matt and a whole bunch of insects. It was terrible. It didn't make sense. I tried it as a shape concrete poems. It was a shape poem about a creature called an antlion. Didn't work. All right, 11, I don't mean rats. I mean like completely different approaches later. 2014, started in 2006. I sold it to Scholastic. And then, of course, they had to change the title. But so this is kind of the process that it takes. Sometimes you just got to keep going. Keep going. And I hate that, and I have all these copies, but you know what? It's the same process I go through today with my project. Hopefully I'm a little smarter and a little quicker and stop myself sooner, but it's the same process. So here are some leads if you're interested in that writing for educational market or work for hire. These are great leads. Again, it's on that PDF for you. This is a, oh, you can't see it. This is a fantastic book if you're interested in figuring out word language for certain grades. It's called Children's Writers Word Book. The purple version is just a certain year version. But what it is a thesaurus, grade levels. So it's awesome. It only goes up to 6th grade because beyond that, it's pretty much what we write anyway. So if you're looking at the word, I don't know, chaos, and you want to know what grade level that is, well, that's at least the 6th grade level. But you know, it gives you a thesaurus with each word has its grade level. And it's fantastic when you're writing for younger kids. Now, remember, if you're writing a picture book, you're actually writing to the adult reader to read it aloud. So that's even a different level of stuff. Like you have to write a picture book with the adult reader in mind, humor and interest level, and the kid listener. That's a challenge. But these are some really great resources if you're interested in any of this. There's not pretty. Say, excuse me. There we go. Okay, so here are some leads if you're interested in writing for the trade industry. There's something called Publishers Marketplace, which is awesome, but is an expensive thing. But you can actually, it's online. What it does is they make announcements of the recent sales. So you can see, they'll say, thus and such sold thus and such manuscript to thus and such editor at thus and such house, and they give you a little blurb. So what it does is it tells you the agent who's selling that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in getting an agent, you write, I don't know, middle grade mystery, you need to know what agent's selling middle grade mystery. It gives you a good bit of information. The thing is, you want to get on and get a membership and then get off. because you don't need it all the time. It's an expense you don't need, so you can do that. They have something free called the Children's Bookshelf that comes into your email, and so I get this, and I just read it, just because it keeps me up to date with what's being sold. Manuscript wish list is great. It's where agents and editors, some of them, go and list what they're currently looking for. So this is when you're further down the line and really have something ready, or maybe some of you have things ready. Publishers' websites, that directly going to their websites, they'll often say, I've already talked about the conferences, retreats, reading up interviews. You kind of got to stalk editors and agents to really figure out what they want to do. The other really great trick is books that you like that are recent. Read the acknowledgments page. Who is their agent? Who is their editor? Do they speak highly of them in their acknowledgments page? That's important to know. And this is a bunch about the process of submitting. I'm not going to go through it right now. I'm going to whip through this. Formatting is really important because it shows that you understand that there is a norm in the profession. And so there's some very specific guides. Some publishers have specific guides, but here's the standards. Black 12-point font, Times New Roman or Arial. Standard page, don't put anything extra in it. Editors say all the time, people send stuff with confetti or bubblegum or whatever, chocolates, they're like, don't do that. That's unprofessional and it just causes me a bunch of mess. So they really want it to look very boring. That's exactly what they want. And don't put it on colored paper or anything. There's some standards about how you put up your information here, where you put the word count here. Those are all kind of standards in the industry. Then if you're writing for an older audience, for a middle grade or a young adult, a lot of times you'll submit a proposal instead. So I've got a lot of information in here about proposals, but we'll just whip on through this. And so, and then you're just actually getting started once you get acquired. This is literally from my editor, my first book with Scholastic. Yeah, there were a few changes, a few revisions. It never ends. And just an example about the illustrations, because it's often surprising to folks that you don't control the illustrations unless you're the illustrator. And here's why. So Bugs Don't Hug, it's this book about insects that give us parental care. And it had this great hook because it's about parents, but it's about insects. I love getting people interested in insects, even if people don't love bugs. But I was very careful not to give too much, to give plenty of room for the illustrator. Like it'd be easy for me to say, it's gotta be this and it's gotta be this and you can't do that. When I left plenty of room for the illustrator, this is what happened. So the very last page, or the very first page was bugs aren't like us. Okay, and the very last page was bugs are like us. Okay, the illustrator did something in the art that I never would have thought to do. They took the message that, you know what, we're all right, and they put in the illustration of the biracial family. This is my nephew. The illustrator didn't know that, but this is my nephew. And that was amazing. Had I said, okay, I want this moral message in the art, felt stifled. But yet they had the freedom to come up with that connection themselves. And they brought that book up one more level. And it became a state book in many states because nonfiction fun book. I mean, it's Alabama state book for 1 year. Wait, a book about bugs, right? But it's because they were able to do that. So, well, too many things to tell you about. We're out of time. But are there any last minute questions? Yeah, please. Go for it.
Well, you've talked a lot about obviously a publishing route. Is there a sensible self-publishing route for children's books?
Yeah, and the reason I didn't talk about it is because I just literally don't know. But I have friends who are in SCBWI who that's what they do. Now, it all depends on what you want to do with it. Like self-publishing is it's a lot more business work. But if you have an audience you know of, it's a good route to go probably, right? If you have a network that's interested, a friend of mine wrote a ballet book and she knows, she's literally in the big ballet competition. So she's got an audience kind of built in. She knows where to sell her book to. So yeah.
I did that and it's really a lot of marketing and it's a lot of work. So I don't really wanna do it again. I did it twice
So much work, and I think
and,
it depends a lot on the type of book. If you're writing a book that you want in libraries, not
yeah,
gonna happen, not gonna happen.
yeah. It was so much not writing, you
Yes.
know?
And
and-
even my work is,
Yeah,
but still,
yeah.
yes, thank you.
What's your opinion of these